Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to a simple guide of contract documents for owners. This webinar is going to be recorded. I'll just get that clear right off the bat. Everyone who's attending today will receive a follow-up email from AIA Contract Documents with a couple of resources that we think you may find helpful after the presentation. And you're also going to get access to the slides from today and the recording of the session. So again, keep an eye out for an email from AIA Contract Documents. We'll also have a little bit of time at the end for any Q&A. So anytime you have a question throughout the presentation, go ahead and type that into your questions box in GoToWebinar, and we'll get to as many audience questions as we can at the end of the presentation. You should see a disclaimer up on your screen just to get one thing out of the way in the beginning. The content of the presentation that you're going to receive and watch today is protected by the AIA, the American Institute of Architects, and AIA Contract Documents. And I'd also like to point out that anything you see today, including the Q&A, should not be considered legal advice. We're going to go over some standard form contract templates and provisions today, but anything in the presentation, if you feel like you have a related item that requires legal attention, we encourage you just to seek out a licensed attorney. So with the fun stuff out of the way, we'll go ahead and introduce ourselves to get us started. My name is Sarah. I work with AIA Contract Documents, helping customers use our online software to create their own documents, which we'll preview a little bit later. And I also just want to help anyone who comes in contact with the AIA Contract Documents to help them understand what's out there, the basic principles around the documents, how they work together. And I quite frequently seek help on that from my colleague Ben, who has joined me today and is going to be presenting with me and is bringing his own expertise. So Ben, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Thank you, Sarah. Hi, my name is Ben Siegel. I'm a manager of Contract Documents Information. I've been doing this with AIA Contract Documents since 2005, so I have a long history, and I answer content and usage questions about the documents, like what document to use on a project, or do we have a certain document for a certain purpose. And I do answer what we call the doc info phone number and email. So some of you may have had contact if you've asked a question by phone or email.
All right, thank you, Ben. So to get us started, we have a lot to go over in the half hour we have set aside. So we're going to get started right away going over what's available in terms of contracts that are available for owners that you may find helpful. And we're going to present what's available by grouping these documents based on what AIA Contract Documents calls as families, and they usually have to do with the delivery method of the project that you're working with. So the first set of documents that I'm going to go over and present to you are for projects that follow the design, bid, build. We also call it the conventional delivery method, and that's just when your project is going to be divided into a design contract for the architect and then the contractor's contract to build the work, so the construction. This is our most popular family of documents, so I refer to them as the conventional. And to go through this, to present the documents that can be used for these conventional projects, I'm going to just go through a visual diagram that just sets up the key parties that you'll see in these projects, and then which documents can define the relationships between these parties. So that will give you a visual of how the documents form these key relationships. So to get us started, we'll start with, of course, the owner. When the owner goes about a conventional project, he or she is going to retain an architect who's going to prepare drawings and specifications, and then also just assist the owner in obtaining bids or proposals, who bids out the work to then a contractor. And the contractor builds the work. So you have two key parties here. These are your prime parties in the conventional delivery method. You'll notice there's no direct contractual relationship between the architect and the contractor, But between the architect and the owner, you're going to have a few options here, depending on a few key differences that Ben can get into a little bit more detail about. But you have the standard B101, your owner-architect agreement, and then we also have a B103 for a complex project, and then we also have an abbreviated owner-architect agreement. So those are the documents that form the relationship between the architect and the owner, depending on the complexity of the project. Now, regarding these alphanumerics, I'm going to go back a second here so you can see them back and reference the entire document title. You'll be familiar with the use of these alphanumerics if you've worked with AIA contracts before or if you've seen them. They represent an organizational system that we have in place just to categorize each document. Each of these letters and numbers actually represents an aspect of the document. That's not quite important for us to get into the details about or really for you to know or understand. For our purposes here today, we're just going to use these alphanumerics to provide a short and easy way to reference this document. So for example, you see the B101 owner-architect agreement. You'll hear us refer to that as just the B101. That's just because the titles, the full titles, get kind of long. So just for brevity, we'll be referring to them by their alphanumerics there. And then you're also going to have a similar array of options with your owner-contractor agreement. And most of the differences here depends on cost structure. And I should say, and this is true for this group of documents as well, you'll pick one of these documents. They're not meant to be used in conjunction with each other through this group of documents. They are meant to be used in conjunction with other documents that form other relationships, but for this owner-contractor purpose, you'll pick one of these, depending if you're working with a stipulated sum or a fixed price. That's your A101. And then you have two different options if you want the cost of the work contracts. So it's the cost of the work plus a fee. And whether or not you want a GMP or a guaranteed maximum price, we'll decide whether you go with the A102 or A103. And then the A104 is the abbreviated owner-contractor agreement. Again, it's abbreviated. It is going to be a lot shorter, but is going to leave out some longer items that you'll see in the A102, 103, and 101. So you have your two prime relationships here. Again, notice there's no direct contractual relationship between the architect and the contractor. That's because those responsibilities are coordinated in the A201 General Conditions document. So the General Conditions document is an umbrella document that falls over the entire project, and it coordinates the key roles and responsibilities between the architect, owner, and contractor. It's meant to be used in conjunction with these documents here. So them together forms the contract documents. I slipped in a little asterisk here, and I apologize. There should also be an asterisk next to the B104. But the B104 and the A104 do not use the general conditions in conjunction. They actually have the general conditions written within themselves. So if you're using those abbreviated B104 and A104, you do not use the additional general conditions document. Otherwise, you'll use this document as a key umbrella document. Now, beyond your prime parties, you're also going to have some sub-parties here. Your architect may hire consultants. Your contractor will probably hire subcontractors. We, of course, have documents to define those relationships, but we aren't going to go into depth here because this is for owners. For any consultants that you as the owner may hire, you have a C103, an owner consultants agreement. We also have an array of other agreements just depending on a few different aspects of that relationship. But the C103 is our main owner consultants agreement. And then we have some bond forms to form the bond between the surety, being just the party that agrees to make payment in the event of non-performance of the contractor. And that's why you have a dotted line here between the surety and the owner, because that relationship only comes into play in the event of non-performance. So you have bond forms, the A310, 312, and A313. They're going to ensure fulfillments of the bid, the performance, payment, and any warranty obligations. And these forms can be used in conjunction with each other. So you have those formed there. So there you have it in kind of a visual perspective here is the different parties in conventional projects and the relationship or the documents that form those relationships. I'm going to kind of bring us to a summary here of all the documents we went over. Ben, do you have anything to add between these documents or anything that I missed?
Just a few things, really. So I wanted to speak in a little more depth about the difference between the abbreviated A104 and B104 and the rest of the, the documents, the larger ones. So in general, we refer to the A201 agreements like A101, A102, A103, and also B101 and B103. There is also a B102 as well. That is an agreement without an architectural scope, but anyway, the point is that that is for a large project. Now, what does this mean? Well, that's very subjective, of course, so we don't have a specific definition, but the general idea is there are some important differences between what we call the large and what we call the medium. We do have a small projects, which we're going to talk about next, but just to go over some basic differences, one is one that Sarah already mentioned, which is that A104 and B104, they do not use A201. So A201 is about 40 pages long, and so it's a pretty lengthy document, and it's important to use if you're using one of those first, several agreements. But if you use A104 and B104 together, the general conditions are already in A104, so you do not need A201 or any other separate general conditions document. So the main difference is just shorter, and it's fewer documents. There are some other differences as well, like for insurance, the A201 agreements, and again, here I'm talking about A101, A102, A103, they have a separate insurance exhibit. And so the exhibit is very comprehensive and includes optional specialty coverages. A104 and also the small, they have basic coverage obligations that are embedded in their respective documents. So with as far as insurance, there is a separate exhibit. It's part of the document, so that's why it's not listed. It's not a separate document. It's just part of the document, but it is a separate exhibit. There are some other more detailed differences, such as all these documents allow the contractor to request evidence of the owner's financial arrangements to pay for the work prior to commencement of the work, but only the A201, the larger one, allows the contractor to request that kind of data after, pardon me, after the work has actually begun, but only in certain circumstances. So there are some other differences too, like about concealed or unknown conditions, or human remains, burial markers, archaeological sites, the job site, superintendent, submittals. There are some other very fine-grained differences. We're not going to go into a whole lot of detail there because it is quite detailed, and also we're trying to keep things short here. But you can see that there are some specific differences between the medium and the large, and so you have to consider that in addition to the number of pages when you're considering what document to use.
Thank you, Ben. And Ben hinted at a few things that we're going to be getting into a little bit later, the first of which being the small projects documents, which are essentially documents that are really short. They're stripped down to the essentials for really small, straightforward projects. You're still going to have the same prime parties here, but you're going to have these short form agreements to form those relationships, that being the B105 and the A105, depending if you're forming the relationship between the architect or the contractor. And again, these are very short. Ben, do you have anything to add on the short form small project documents?
Yes, so to talk about the short form or small versus the medium or the large, there are some important differences there too, of course. One difference is that with the small, we omitted any sort of dispute resolution language. So there's nothing about resolving any potential disputes, whereas the medium and of course the large have a mechanism by which the parties agree ahead of time to resolve disputes. It's basically that the parties go to mediation first, and then they go to a checkbox system, either arbitration or litigation, or other. So there is a process laid out. Again, not going to go into a great level of detail, but is that the medium and the large do have a dispute resolution process laid out, whereas the small does not. Another difference is that in A105, the short form owner contractor agreement, that's only set up as a stipulated sum. So it does not have any sort of language related to cost plus, whereas the medium and of course the large, as you saw, that actually has options in it. So on the larger side of things, we have 3 different agreements, A101, A102, and A103 that you saw, and that's for stipulated sum, cost of the work plus a fee with a guaranteed maximum price, GMP, and cost plus without a GMP. A104, the medium, has all 3 options embedded in that document, so you choose one. And then A105, this one you see here, is just for stipulated sum. So that's it. It's only for that option. So you could modify it if you want, but another option might be to bump up to the medium, and then you can choose the cost plus option. If you had a small job but it was cost plus, you might consider the medium, the A104. And so like A104, the medium, A105 does have its own general conditions, and that's where the general conditions are. And then as far as the architectural sign, B105, again, shorter than the medium B104. It's formatted very informally. It does not have, pardon me, it does not have phases of design, for example. The other agreements have phases like SDs, DDs, schematic design, design development, that sort of thing, but B105 does not have those phases. It's just a very, very informal, very short agreement. So this is for, again, a very small job, and obviously that is subjective, so we don't have a specific dollar amount or anything like that, because it is going to vary from person to person. But hopefully that should give you an idea of what a small project looks like versus a medium or large.
All right, thank you, Ben. That's a lot of good detail there. I'm going to go ahead and move us along to our next group of documents, and that's going to be our construction manager documents. And that's going to include construction manager as advisor, or a CMA, and construction manager as constructor, or CMC. These are separate families, so we're going to start with the CMA. And this is when the owner retains a construction manager who acts independently as a third party, advisor on construction management in the project. So we're still going to have our owner. That owner is still going to retain the architect, who again is going to prepare those drawings and specifications. And in this case, if you're working with a CMA project, you're going to use that B132. So this is the CMA edition of the owner-architect agreement. And then they're also going to, of course, retain the CMA, who's going to act as an additional advisor throughout the project, including that early design phase. So it's going to be retained around the same time as the architect. And that's going to use the C132, the owner CMA agreement. And this CMA is going to give the owner construction management advice through both design and construction. And of course, this person's going to have increased expertise then in managing a project from start to finish. The owner is then going to retain contractors directly. So we have that owner contractor agreement for the CMA family. That's going to be the CMA edition. And it's also going to have its own general conditions as well, the A232. Rather than the A201. So you have a different set of general conditions. So you have some similar relationships here, just a little bit different based on the party or based on the project you're working with here, and changes in some of the language due to the CMA and some of the composition. So you still have those sub-parties, still using that consultant agreement, subcontractor agreement, and then we have that C103. So you can use that in either conventional families or any of these CMA or CMC parties. And then, of course, we have the CMC family, which looks a little bit different. The owner is going to retain a construction manager who's not only going to provide pre-construction advising services, but then construction management services throughout the actual building of the project. So the owner is still going to retain that architect. So we have the owner-architect agreement CMC edition. This is the B133. but also retain a CMC. And the CMC is going to differ from the CMA because that CMC is providing services beyond advising and is actually going to build the work. So they have responsibility over the work via direct contracts with subcontractors. And depending on whether or not you want a guaranteed maximum price, you see that GMP there, you can use the A133 or the A134. And these are both cost plus agreements. Because the CMC gets involved so early, the cost plus structure makes the most sense with that. So again, you can choose between with or without a GMP. And this family, CMC, is going to use the A201 general conditions. You may just want to make those cost of work modifications depending on the price structure that you pick out. And once again, you're going to have those sub-parties. Notice that the CMC retains the subcontractors directly, and then your C103 for any consultants that you may hire during this project. So Ben, do you have anything to add on construction manager agreements?
Just a few things. We have these two CM families. You can see the structure. They're sometimes called CM at risk versus CM not at risk. So in this family that you see here, this is sometimes called CM at risk because the CM is the contractor and it is doing the actual construction. Versus in the CMA family, the CMA is sometimes called CM not at risk because they're not actually doing any construction at all. There's a separate contractor or separate contractors. And so that is the fundamental difference between these two families. And so if you look at all the families, you can see they're set up differently. This is kind of similar. This CMC family is kind of similar to the conventional family, except for that a CM is involved in pre-construction and construction. And so that is a difference. So in that sense, this CMC family you see is actually closer to the conventional family than it is to the CMA family. But again, there are different families. We updated the conventional family in 2017, and we updated the CMA and CMC families in 2019. So that's going to be the current version of those documents. In most cases, most families have their own separate general conditions, but as you can see here, the CMC family is a little bit different. It borrows from the conventional family because it is similar to the conventional family. So the other families have their own general conditions. This one kind of borrows from the conventional family. So it does use A201, again, updated in 2017. And these agreements that you see like A133, A134, and B133, those were updated in 2019.
All right, thank you, Ben. So as Ben mentioned, there are many families of documents. We went over the more popular ones today, but I'll show you where you can go to look through the other families of documents. But in the meantime, we're going to get into some other documents that's going to include some forms you may want to know about, some exhibits, and just other key documents. And we're going to start with our administrative forms here that we thought you may find helpful. And I'm already going to turn it back over to Ben because he knows a lot about these forms and he's going to kind of briefly go through them and just explain what each form is for.
Thank you, Sarah. So these are a few of our forms, certainly not all of them. We're not going over all of our documents today because we got over 200 of them. And so we have many, many forms, but just to briefly go over what these are, just starting with G701, that is a change order. That is to order a change of any type to a construction document. You can see there's a subcontractor version. We do have different versions of most of these documents. So you can see that we also have sometimes different versions for different families, like a CMA version for a construction manager advisor. I'm going to skip down to G709 and G714 because those are related to a change or a proposed change. So G709 is a proposal request. So it's a request for information about a potential change. So they can use that to request some sort of information about a change that may or may not happen. G701 is the change order, which is used once all the parties agree on the terms of the change. And between that, you've got G714, which is a CCD, a construction change directive, and that's used when you need to order the contractor to make a change. Otherwise, there's going to be a delay in the project, but you haven't reached agreement yet. So chronologically, it might go G709 first for a request about a proposed change, then G714, the construction change directive, and then finally G701 for the actual change once everybody has agreed. And then we have our payment application forms, G702 and G703. Again, you can see that there are subcontractor versions of those. And that's just simply for a contractor to apply for payment to an owner. Obviously, the subcontractor version is from subcontractor to contractor. And G703 is the continuation sheet. It is a table. You just fill out the items of work. A contractor would list each line item of work on that form, and then give the big picture, so to speak, on G702, which is the application and certificate, the actual application. So the architect would typically certify that, and so the contractor is applying, architect certifying, the owner is paying. That's how it goes with those forms. G704 is a certificate of substantial completion. We have this to obviously certify the job is substantially complete, which is when the project is complete to a point where the owner can use or occupy it for its intended purpose. And it's also, so this form is very short. All these forms are very short, like 1 or 2 pages. And so it has an area where you can add an inspection list or punch list to add any items that are left to be completed. This is not a certificate of final completion, which is not something that we have, but that document does certify the job is substantially complete, and then you attach those inspection list or punch list items that the contractor is still obligated to complete. And then finally, we have G612, which is a set of instructions that an owner can issue to an architect. It actually has 2 parts, a part A and a part B, but that's just simply a set of owner's instructions to the architect. It's a little bit of a different form than our others, so that's why it's kind of out to the side here, but that's another form that we have. Okay, as far as insurance and bonds, I did mention this before. We do have these exhibits that go with these agreements. You can see them up here on the screen. And these are all fundamentally the same, or at least very, very similar, but they are exhibits that go with the agreement. Again, this is on the larger side of things. So the medium option and the conventional family and the small family, they have their own insurance information, but these are the exhibits that go with, pardon me, that go with the agreement. And we do have resources on the insurance and bonds exhibit. We have various parts on our website, educational resources, and we're going to go over that and link to that at the end as well. And by the same token, we have SP, Sustainable Project exhibits. So these are exhibits, and again, an exhibit is meant to not be standalone, but to be attached to an existing agreement. So a lot of these agreements will refer to that and have that be necessarily a part of the project. And so you would have this exhibit. They are separate documents. You would attach them as exhibits to the existing agreement. And it's for a green or environmentally friendly project, you might say. And so the parties agree to create and stick to a sustainability plan as far as materials and processes. And so it's creating that plan. That's really what these exhibits do, is to create a plan the parties agree to ahead of time. And so that's what these documents are.
All right, thank you, Ben. Ben took us through that nice and quickly. I just want to wrap up with a few key resources and where you can find samples of these documents. I see a couple questions. We'll have time. We'll stay for an extra 5 minutes or so for a Q&A session at the end. But please keep in mind that you can go to aiacontracts.org to get a sample of any of these contracts that we've talked about today, and we'll link to that in our follow-up email to everyone. In addition, we have a Learn webpage in which we have additional resources for working with AIA contract documents, where you can get into some of these topics in more detail. And then any questions beyond today about using the online service can go to our tech support team. And then any questions about the documents beyond today can go to our doc info line, and you may get a chance to talk to Ben himself. So thank you very much, Ben, for taking us through those. I do see a couple audience questions that I just want to run by you in the last few seconds we have here. We have someone who asked about if you have a direct owner vendor like furniture, technology, audiovisual, security, signage, artwork, things like that.
Yes, we do. We again, we have a lot of documents, so this was not covering all of them. For example, we have a design build family that we did not talk about today. And by the same token, we have an interiors family that is specific to interiors work. Generally, the documents are pretty broad. They can be used for whatever, but we do have an owner vendor agreement. It's A151. We also have a purchase order. We do have other documents, but A151 is an agreement between an owner and a vendor. So that would be, I think that would fit into what you're talking about as far as like furniture, technology, other things like that. So yes, we do have that.
Thank you, Ben. And then I think we'll have time for one more question, and that's for a residential edition. When the owner is casting as a CM, what contracts would you recommend for the general contractor and owner hired subcontractors?
Well, so the documents aren't necessarily divided by commercial versus residential because, again, they're written fairly broadly. But as by residential, a lot of people mean small, although, of course, a residential project could be big and a commercial project could be small. But if you're doing a construction management project, and since you mentioned CM in your question, I would say that you would use one of the CM families, either a CM advisor or a CM constructor. But that being said, these are somewhat lengthy documents, so you would use the right document for the right project, the right family, but you may need to make some changes. You may need to take some things out because the CM documents, to be honest, they're pretty lengthy. They're not short, I would say. So yes, we do have the shorter documents, but they're not always appropriate because they might be too short or they might be in the wrong family. So if it's truly a CM job, I would recommend using one of the CM families, and then you can take out non-applicable material.
Thank you, Ben. I just have one more came through for a homeowner wanting to build a sustainable addition. Which docs are recommended?
Well, so for a homeowner, again, I'm going to sort of assume that this is for a smaller project. You would want to use either the small or maybe the medium documents. And then if you wanted to add one of those sustainable exhibits, then you could certainly do that. If you wouldn't mind, Sarah, real quick, if you go back to the sustainable project slide, those exhibits could go with any document, any agreement. So they are specifically listed. Yes, those. Thank you. The large ones specifically mention them and say that this is part of the contract documents. The small does not, but that doesn't preclude you from including them. So you could still use those same exhibits in conjunction with any agreement, including the medium option or the small option.
All right, thank you, Ben. And just quickly, are there any contract or forms for manufacturing and construction material and or equipment distribution?
I would put that more into the owner vendor category. So yes, we do have that owner vendor document that I mentioned. They're again not necessarily for specifically to manufacture or material, but well, I guess a vendor could be somebody providing materials. So I would say that the owner vendor agreement A151 is probably appropriate for that.
All right, well, thank you very much, Ben. I do see someone who submitted a question just asking if an owner of a university with an employee who is a member of the AIA can use that membership to access and purchase the documents. AIA members do receive discounts on some documents, so that may be something you can look at aiacontracts.org/purchase. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Thank you very much, Ben, for imparting your wisdom. Everyone who is attending, keep an eye out for an email from AIA Contract Documents. That's going to include some helpful resources beyond today. So thank you very much and have a good rest of your day.